On this episode of Women Behind Bars, one woman claims she was driven to kill her father after years of sexual abuse.
I performed oral sex and didn't really know it. I couldn't believe that this was my dad, that he was hurting me like this.
We had a victim laying on a couch with apparent gunshot wounds, blood all over his face.
Another woman kills a key witness to keep her boyfriend out of jail.
She was in a gang. She participated in drug dealing.
Baby doll turned out to be probably one of the ruthless females that I've ever seen.
They had wrapped a phone cord around her throat trying to strangle her as they dumped the urine down her throat.
2 women, 2 brutal crimes. These are the stories of Stacey Lannert and Charaty White. In the early morning hours of July 4th, 1990, Tom Lannert was shot to death in his home. According to investigators, the shooter was his own daughter, 18-year-old Stacey Lannert.
This was a well-thought-out plan to kill her father.
But allegations of years of abuse painted a different theory.
Stacey was in fear of her father and was always in fear of her father.
Was this a calculated murder for profit or a daughter's desperate breaking point?
I remember that carefree time when everything was just okay, and you're happy to explore and the world's ahead of you and you feel like you can do anything. I did feel that growing up.
Stacey Ann Lannert was born in 1972 in St. Louis, Missouri, to Tom and Deborah Lannert.
My dad, he was my hero. I remember how I would wait for him to come home and I'd just be, so excited when he'd pull up. And, I do have those memories and I really try to cling to them.
The Lannerts, from all accounts, seemed like they were probably the family next door.
But the smiling family photos concealed a shocking secret.
It changed after my grandpa, Lannert, died. Once he died, my dad really started drinking heavily.
Mr. Lannert was an alcoholic, and so people sometimes could excuse behavior. In their mind, they'll say, oh, it was because he was drunk.
Tom Lannert's drinking created friction in the marriage, and Deborah, Stacey's mother, refused to be with him when he was drunk.
We lived near my mother's family, and she spent a lot more time with them than she did with us, and she became more independent.
As a rift grew between husband and wife, Tom began to spend more time with his oldest daughter.
Stacey was known as Tom's favorite. She was the one that he chose to spend time with the most. He rewarded her with more presents because of that.
It made me feel very special. We had little T-shirts that said, Daddy's #1 girl.
It was in the basement of the family home where everything changed for Stacey. She says she was 8 years old when her dad first molested her.
He'd put marshmallow cream on his area. He'd have me touch him, told me that was his little friend. I performed oral sex and didn't really know it. He had told me that I was special and that he loved me and that I loved him, and that's what people who love each other do.
Several months later, Lannert claims her father's secret game turned violent.
I knew it had changed because it was the first time I felt pain, and it was the first time they raped me. I couldn't really wrap my mind around what was happening and how it felt because it hurt so badly. I couldn't believe that this was my dad, that this was my dad that I loved, that he was hurting me like this. I just screamed, and I might not even have screamed out loud.
She did dissociate, which is very typical of battered children. Children in that sort of abusive situation really almost, some of them describe it as an out-of-body experience. They can't deal with the feelings that they're that they're actually feeling when they're being raped or molested.
He took something from me right then, at that moment, and part of it was the ability to feel, and to ever feel normal, or to ever feel really and truly happy again, you know, right then, right there, on that spot, on that floor, with him.
After the rape, Stacey screamed for her mom, but she was not home. According to Lannert, her father told her that Mom already knew about the abuse and didn't care. Stacey believed her dad and kept quiet.
An aunt said that she thought that Stacey acted like a sexual abuse victim because she and her sister, who was Stacey's mother, had also been sexual abuse victims, and she recognized the signs.
Stacey's mom, Deborah, sent her to a psychologist, but Stacey denied being raped. Overwhelmed by a crumbling marriage, Deborah did not know what more she could do for her daughter. Tom and Deborah Lannert divorced when Stacey was 12 years old and shared custody of the children. Stacey says her father's sexual demands never let up.
I didn't want him to touch me. I didn't feel like I could go through it anymore, and I'd just rather die than have to deal with what I was dealing with.
At 14 years old, Stacey attempted suicide. She tried to overdose on pills. Lannert says her sister was her only reason to live.
You know, I took care of my sister, and being with her was really the only thing that I had that kept me hanging on.
In 1988, Tom Lannert and his daughters moved to St. John, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis, and Stacey threw herself into high school activities. To those on the outside, Stacey appeared to be a normal, happy student.
She was a member of the yearbook staff. She was a member of the tennis team. She had quite a few friends.
But Stacey was careful not to let anyone into her private world.
The closer we grew, the more distant she made it. And when it ended, it seemed that we just ended better as friends than as boyfriend and girlfriend. I think she did what she needed to do in order to keep her secret. She was completely afraid that somebody would find out.
You don't want to be looked at differently. And there was so much shame and guilt because I always felt like some part of me allowed it to happen. And I wondered how people would treat me once they knew.
Fed up with her abusive home life, the 17-year-old quit high school in her senior year and moved to be with her mother, who had remarried a man in the military stationed in Guam.
Stacey was doing well out in Guam, living with her mother, until she got an emergency call from her sister who said that she needed help.
She started calling us, and she'd be drunk, and she was 14 years old. She's begging me to come home.
After a 2-month stay in Guam, Stacey returned home to Missouri in April 1990 to help care for her sister.
Once Stacey moves back in the house, she now then assumes the role of the mother and wife back in the role that she had left. So there was a lot of tension in the home after Stacey moves back from Guam.
Stacey's 18th birthday was far from a happy occasion. She remembers that day as one of her father's worst assaults.
He was drunk, and he just beat me. Cut off my ponytail, brought the knife down by the side of my face, and with what he had left, just pulled me to the ground and raped me. And then when he got done, he kicked me, and he spit on me, and he threw $40 on me and told me happy birthday.
When Women Behind Bars continues.
We had a victim laying on the couch with apparent gunshot wounds, blood all over his face.
18-year-old Stacey Lannert was the image of a bright, outgoing, college-bound teen. No one suspected the terrible secret she hid from everyone. According to Lannert, she had endured 10 years of repeated sexual abuse at the hands of her own father. Then, on July 3, 1990, tension in the Lannert household reached a boiling point.
I can't even remember everything that was said or everything that had happened, but him and I had a fight. A lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, and I eventually ran out the door.
Stacey and her sister Christy left the house and hung out with friends at the fair in downtown St. Louis.
And then when it was time to go home, I didn't want to go home. I didn't ever want to go home again. So we actually went to a little cheap motel. I didn't know what we were gonna do. You know, Christy's looking to me for answers, and I don't know. I really don't. We had to go back to get the dog.
They had wanted to pick up a puppy that they had got because they were afraid that their father was going to kill the puppy because he said he was going to kill a puppy.
We drove home, and when we got there, we went through the basement window. We're trying to sneak in, sneak out before he ever even realized we were there. I heard him. I heard him upstairs. Something had woke him up. And I thought, we're leaving here. We're leaving here right now. Whatever I've got to do, we're gonna leave. And the gun was downstairs from him earlier. He put it down there, and I took it upstairs.
She went upstairs because she knew he'd been drinking all day and she didn't know what she was going to run into.
I didn't know what I actually thought I was gonna do, but I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I kind of knew that this might happen. By the time I got upstairs, he had passed back out, and I put the gun on a ledge, and I shot him.
According to the police statement, Christy Lannert says she was in a bedroom when she heard the shot.
The first shot, while Mr. Lannert was sleeping on the couch, struck him in the shoulder and awokened him. At that point, he asked Stacey to call for an ambulance.
He thought that he had broken his collarbone. He thought he had twisted and broken his collarbone. That's how drunk he was.
She intended to get him help, and he sat up and they talked, and she looked for the phone and she was going to call an ambulance.
And he starts screaming, just yelling at us, calling us whores, and wait till he gets up from here. And so I'm looking around panicked, going to where the phone should be. The phone isn't there, and I walked back in the living room and there was the gun. And I thought, it's gotta stop. And then I shot him the second time.
The second shot that she fired was in the forehead, which was the immediate cause of death.
Well, when I first walked into the scene, it was extremely hot. It was the 4th of July, it was very hot, and we had a victim laying on the couch with apparent gunshot wounds, blood all over his face.
The Lannert sisters were taken to the police station for questioning. Detective Tom Schulte of the Major Case Squad was assigned to interrogate Stacey.
I first had my suspicions that she was connected with the case when I walked into the room, quite honestly.
I mean, the way he looked at me, I knew he knew.
When I asked about the abuse in the household, she busted down. She just started crying. And that's when I knew that she was involved in the homicide.
I just remember telling him. And when I told him, I was at peace. You know, I was so glad that everything was over.
At 1 a.m., after 6 hours of questioning, police asked Stacey to do a video reenactment of the crime.
I didn't want to at all whatsoever. I didn't want to step foot in that house ever, ever, ever again. Detective Schulte told me that it would be okay and that I needed to go back. So I walked back in there, and the only condition that I'd had was that I didn't see the area. They said that if I was sorry about what I did, I would go back. And I was sorry.
Stacey walked investigators through the crime scene step by step.
And I decided at that moment that I was gonna do it. I walked behind here. He was laying on this couch right here. Walked behind here, put the gun on that little ledge, and then pulled the trigger.
Then, in the early morning hours of July 5th, she was booked for murder. Stacey spent the next 2 years in jail, awaiting trial. Chris McGraw was appointed as Stacey's defense attorney and knew he had an uphill battle on his hands.
Stacey wasn't necessarily forthright with the allegations of sexual abuse at the outset.
I couldn't even say that my dad raped me. At that time, all I could say was that he hurt me. He hurt me.
The trial began in October 1992. The cornerstone of Stacey's defense would be her mental state, caused by years of systematic and brutal sexual abuse, a claim the prosecution would contest.
Throughout the investigation, we could come up with absolutely no concrete evidence whatsoever that she was sexually abused. We talked to enough people and interviewed enough people that something would have come out, and we could not substantiate it one bit.
Dr. Hutchinson believed that Stacey was actually dissociating at the moment that she shot her father, and that very well may be true because some of the details she's told about that crime are inconsistent. There's things she doesn't remember very well.
So there was going to be gaps, because if she had dissociative disorder, this is what would happen. We would have gaps that we couldn't explain.
The prosecution started off strong, showing jurors the videotaped reenactment Stacey did for police. Her cool demeanor puzzled jurors.
And I went downstairs to try and find the phone to call. I was going to call. I couldn't find it. And I panicked. So then I shot him again.
Who were you going to call?
The police.
I think people on the jury were, I don't know if they were surprised or they were just sort of like, well, she really didn't care. Look at her, she's so emotionless about this. She's like, she just killed her father and she can just walk through it like there's nothing to it.
The videotape supported the prosecution's theory that Stacey was a cold-blooded killer. But the defense argued that Lannert's reaction was evidence that she did shut down emotionally.
The court took a recess after the tape, and the jurors were escorted out. And all of a sudden, Stacey just completely melted down, just completely unfolded with a hysterical crying and real outpouring of emotion, which fit pretty close to what the psychologists were telling us. And that is that she can hold things back and take herself out of the situation for periods of time, but then, like anything else, it's an avalanche. Unfortunately for us, the jurors never saw that.
The prosecution had other evidence that Stacey simply wanted her father's money and was willing to kill for it. One witness told the jury Stacey wanted to hire a hitman.
A friend of hers that used to babysit, she said that he knows someone that would do it, whose name, to my knowledge, is Artie. Okay, and I told her she was completely nuts, and that, no matter how, much she wants the money or how much she can't stand her dad, that, that's a little bit too drastic.
It was determined that she had tried to hire someone to kill her father, and that never worked out, so therefore she had to do it herself.
The prosecutor brought a really strong case for that it was premeditated.
We see that there was pre-planning. We see that not only shot once, but shot twice. And that is a clear indication that she wanted him dead.
Did she try to hire a hitman? Probably. Did she try to do this? Sure. Did she do it for the money? I don't think so. Where I differed from the people who were running the investigation at the time is I believe that she did it because she was being abused. They believe that she did it because she wanted the money. That's the difference between murder one and murder two.
When Women Behind Bars continues.
There were people that were just shocked. How could we possibly come back with that verdict?
Stacey Lannert was on trial for the murder of her father in St. Louis County, Missouri, in October 1992. The defense argued that Stacey was a confused and battered child. The prosecution claimed she was a cold, calculating killer.
I have investigated many homicides, probably close to 50. And I can say, without a doubt, this is probably one of the most cold-blooded crimes that I've ever investigated.
Quite a few of the jurors, and myself included, really had lots of reservations because she did shoot him twice. And the second shot was at very close range. She had to go over and see him and get there and had to pull the trigger a second time, make that conscious decision to do that again. So That had a huge impact on people.
Once the court would not allow us to instruct in self-defense, I still felt there was enough evidence out there for the jury to embrace the idea that Stacey committed a homicide but shouldn't be punished to the full extent of the law.
There were people that were just shocked. How could we possibly come back with that verdict or that decision at all?
When the verdict was read, there was an emotional response by the spectators. There was a lot of yelling and screaming and crying. Of course, it was an emotional, packed case right up to the very end.
I felt as though justice was served when the jury came down with a verdict of first-degree murder.
I really think that the justice system really had let Stacey down, and I think I was kind of part of that. I think the jury believed she was sexually abused. I think the jury said, yes, you were sexually abused, but we don't care. And I think that that's a separate unto itself wound.
Because Stacey was not being abused in the moment of the attack, the judge did not allow self-defense as an argument.
It felt like the defense attorney did bring out that there was sexual abuse. And that it probably was going on. But the judge had instructed us to not really bring that into play because it didn't impact the decision for what had happened in that moment.
How could anybody sentence me to life without parole after knowing what we lived through? There was that part of me that so badly wanted to be forgiven.
Stacey was incarcerated at the Women's Eastern Correctional Center in Vandalia, Missouri, to serve out her sentence of life without the possibility of parole.
It's taken me a long time to discover anything about life. In the beginning, I didn't care. I didn't care if I was alive or if I wasn't alive. I didn't have emotions. I didn't have feelings. What other people take for granted, I didn't even know was there.
Missouri state law requires all offenders to hold down a job or attend school. Stacey works for CHAMP, an organization that trains assistant dogs for the physically challenged.
They stay with us in our rooms. We don't actually have cells. I live in a 5-man room. There's 5 people that live in my room. We have bunk beds, and the dogs have crates that are up against the wall. They sleep in their crates. But the dogs don't look at us as being prisoners. The dogs look at us and they care for us and they love us regardless of what we did or what we've been through.
Offenders who have life sentences, they've come to accept the fact that they're incarcerated. This is going to be their life, so they need to make the best of it. And you definitely see them become mentors and better adjusted.
I don't want to say I like prison because I obviously at some point in time would love the opportunity to be free, but what I like about being in prison is that I have control of my body and what happens to it.
She gets very discouraged about this case sometimes. She really hopes for a future and she really wants to have something else than this.
The hardest part about being in prison is being separated from my niece. I don't think being in prison ever really bothered me until I couldn't be there for her birth and now for her life.
Stacey's clemency petition, filed in 1998, was passed over by 3 previous governors and now rests on the desk of current Governor Matt Blunt.
Clemency is an act of mercy for cases just such as this, someone who falls through the cracks in the legal system and will have no other remedy for relief.
I would love to see her get clemency from the governor. She spent her entire adult life there. I think she's probably more than learned her lesson.
If we're not successful in this clemency petition, Stacey will never get out of prison. She will die here.
The prosecuting attorney's office still firmly believes that Stacey Lannert is right where she belongs.
I cannot possibly fathom the fact that somebody who does this to their own flesh and blood deserves to be back out on the street.
I have regret. I have a lot of regret. I wish I could change things. I wish I had been stronger and would have found a different way to make it stop. I'm grateful that the abuse has stopped, but I wish I had found a different way to make it stop than the choice that I made. I made a devastating choice.
17 years now. She's been in prison for getting herself out of a situation in a terrible way, and I don't minimize the murder of her father. She was 18 years old when this happened. She's 35 now. It's time to let her go.
Being in prison, I've been able to become the person who I think I was supposed to have been before all this started. I try to make a difference. I do. I want my life to stand for something no matter where I am, whether I be here or out or wherever.
Next up on Women Behind Bars, a brutal homicide.
There were injuries that I'd never seen before.
We all cut her. We all played a part in it.
For more information about Women Behind Bars, go to www.wetv.com. On May 3, 2000, police detectives discovered the mutilated body of a 19-year-old woman dumped in an alleyway. The victim turned out to be Danielle Montgomery, a key witness who is set to testify against her boyfriend in his upcoming murder trial.
She wouldn't die, she kept fighting. She was pleading for her life.
This was an extremely painful death, and it was done to make her scream.
Even more disturbing was the fact that the killers were 3 young girls, including a teenager named Charaty White, known on the streets as Baby Doll.
There's no question that Baby Doll was the ringleader.
But did Charaty mastermind this horrendous slaying, or was she just following orders? The Gateway Arch stands proudly over St. Louis, Missouri, as a national icon and popular tourist attraction. But just north of the stainless steel monument are broken neighborhoods scarred by violence and neglect where kids grow up fast. Charaty White, nicknamed Baby Doll, was a product of this dangerous environment. At age 15, she left home and had to fend for herself.
She was in a gang. She participated in drug dealing. She participated in other violence. She was admittedly known to carry a gun.
She had a background, a history with our police department for Part 1 crimes, burglaries, and things of that nature.
But no one suspected what Charaty was truly capable of.
We did not know how evil she was, and we're thinking she's just into prostitution and drugs. We did not know she had this in her at all.
The case had its beginnings with the murder of Jerome Harden, and that happened right after Christmas in 1999.
It was a drug deal that had gone bad.
Jerome Harden wanted to buy some marijuana just for personal use, and he knew a woman, Charaty White, named Baby Doll, and she told him that she had connections, that she could score him some pot.
Charaty and Jerome waited together in a parked car for Charity's friend Charles Liston and her boyfriend Demetrius Ursery, who were supposed to have the drugs.
Charity's plan was to lead him to Charles Liston, and then Charles Liston would rob him of the money that he had brought to buy the pot.
It was a robbery under the pretense of a drug deal.
I think a struggle ensued inside the car, and Mr. Liston had decided to shoot Mr. Harden.
The bullet hit Jerome Harden in the face. After he was shot, Liston, Charaty, and her boyfriend Demetrius Ursery fled the scene.
They had a tentative ID of Baby Doll, Charaty White, as participating in the robbery murder, but the investigation was very slow.
Detectives finally got answers when Charles Liston's girlfriend, 19-year-old Danielle Montgomery, showed up at police headquarters.
When we first saw Danielle, she appeared a lot younger than what she actually was. She seemed very, very quiet, very kept to herself.
Danielle Montgomery was living with Charles Liston, the shooter of Jerome Harden. She, at that point, had been the victim of domestic violence.
And I think she did see this opportunity and thought, well, maybe this could be my out. If they actually do arrest him, he goes to jail.
Danielle told the police that her boyfriend was responsible for the murder of Jerome Harden. I think she also gave them Charaty White's name, maybe just as Baby Doll, and a third person who was part of the deal.
Danielle's information was the break detectives needed.
We felt good at that point that we could get the ball rolling and get somewhere on this case.
But if word got out about their key witness, Danielle could be in jeopardy.
Because we knew that Charles, if he found out about Danielle, is the one that's trying to turn him in, we knew this could turn bad.
Just days later, Danielle shocked investigators when she returned to headquarters with Charles Liston in tow.
She came upstairs and there's somebody with her. And from looking at him and from seeing the pictures and we were trying to locate him, we're like, oh my gosh, she just brought Charles to us.
Danielle lured Liston into police headquarters under the guise of dropping battery charges against him.
We hurried up and kind of whisked him away, got him into one of our interview rooms, and then got her to a different section, began talking to her and asking her, why are you doing this? At that point, she thought she was doing us a favor, and she thought, that she was actually doing a good job. She felt good about herself. She should feel good about bringing him in, but this is not the way that we wanted to do this.
Detectives immediately arrested Charles Liston for the murder of Jerome Hardin.
Charles became very irate, became violent, stood up from the interview table. So at that point, we knew he was very angry at us, and he was very angry at Danielle. He went to the medium security institution here in the city of St. Louis, which we refer to as the workhouse.
Police then picked up Liston's accomplices, Baby Doll and her boyfriend, Demetrius Ursary, known as Mighty. Mighty was sent to the workhouse pending trial. Charaty was called in for questioning.
But Charles finally got up, and that's when the shot went off.
Did you have any involvement in this with setting this up?
No, Jerome was my friend.
Is there anything that we haven't covered?
Only that I ain't have nothing to do with it, and I was doing what the man with the gun was telling me to do.
Charaty was soon released due to lack of evidence. Danielle left the police station knowing she would be called upon at a later date to testify.
Danielle was one of those people that we were worried about because we knew that she didn't have any family around. She was probably on the run. She did have limited resources. We tried to instill in Danielle when she left here that, please keep in contact with us.
Unknown to detectives, Danielle began to have second thoughts and went to visit Charles Liston in prison.
Danielle Montgomery had gone to tell her old boyfriend, Charles Liston, that while she had turned him in, she now regretted it, and she wasn't going to testify against him. By that time, obviously, it was too late. He didn't trust her.
According to the prosecution, it was then that Charles Liston decided Danielle had to die.
He was thinking if he got rid of Danielle, that he would walk on the murder that he was sitting in jail on, him and Demetrius Ursary.
From the jailhouse telephone, Charles Liston called Charaty and his new girlfriend, Tiny, to coordinate the hit on Danielle.
Tiny was diagnosed as being mentally retarded, mildly mentally retarded. Tiny essentially did whatever Charles told her to do.
But Charaty White had personal reasons for wanting Danielle dead, and Liston knew it.
He would tell Baby Doll, you have to do this, you have to protect yourself, you have to take care of snitches, you have to protect your boyfriend, Mighty.
The control that men have over women it can be very strong, and we certainly saw it in Danielle's case. When he said to her, hey, I've got a place for you to live, you need to go stay there, she did.
Charles Liston was able to coax her into going to stay with Tiny, who he said would keep her hidden until his trial was over, and then those two could get back together, and she trusted him, and unfortunately, he was lying the whole time.
At the beginning of May 2000, Danielle moved in with Tiny and lost contact with Detective Stone and his partner, Detective Carroll.
All of a sudden, the number that she was supposed to be at for the police, she's no longer at, and they can't find her. They'd say she's gone to ground.
She decided to go on her own instead of talking to the detectives, and so she was out of our grasp. We couldn't help her.
Danielle trusted the wrong people, and Danielle thought she'd solved her own problems. Unfortunately, the people she was trusting were her problems. Charles Liston became aware that a new grand jury date was coming up, and so the goal would be to get rid of Danielle before she could testify in front of the grand jury, and then charges would have to be dropped. And as a consequence, he convinced Baby Doll and Tiny that she had to die that night.
When Women Behind Bars continues.
They had wrapped a phone cord around her throat trying to strangle her as they dumped the urine down her throat.
In May 2000, Charles Liston was sitting in a St. Louis jail awaiting his murder trial. He wanted the state's key witness, Danielle Montgomery, to disappear before she could testify against him. From a prison phone, Liston recruited Charaty White to carry out his deadly scheme with the help of 2 other women, Crystal Barge and Tiny, whose name is being withheld to protect her identity. On the evening of May 3rd, Danielle never suspected she was being set up to die.
Danielle was asked to watch Tiny's 3 boys while Tiny and one of the other girls, Charaty White, had gone to meet with Crystal Barge.
On the way back to Tiny's apartment, the 3 girls finalized their plan to kill Danielle Montgomery.
When the girls got back to the apartment, Danielle was in the kitchen, and Charles Liston had called and wanted to talk to Danielle, and when Danielle got on the phone with Charles, Tiny had placed her 3 little boys in a closet because she didn't want them to see what was going to happen.
She had made a bed for them in a largish closet that was off of the bedroom. And she turned the radio up, in addition to preventing the neighbors from hearing any screams, was also to prevent her children from hearing the screams.
Baby doll went into the kitchen and began beating Danielle Montgomery, knocking her to the ground. And each girl took a steak knife and began stabbing.
They stabbed her repeatedly. The estimates we have were over 100 stab wounds and cut wounds alone.
Danielle was fighting for her life, and the wounds on the palm of her left hand were signs that she was trying to grab the knife and prevent the knife from cutting her further.
The kitchen knives were too dull to inflict immediately fatal wounds, so the attackers turned to other methods.
One of the ways that they tried to kill her was to first suffocate her, and they tied a bag around her neck. Danielle was still able to get her hands free and try and tear open a hole in the bag.
When that failed, the girls tried to drown Danielle with mop water and even urine from Tiny's 3 small children, who were still in the closet during the attack.
One of her little boys had to go to the bathroom, and she gave him a cup to pee in. They had wrapped a phone cord around her throat trying to strangle her as they dumped the urine down her throat.
Phone logs from prison show that Charles Liston called the apartment numerous times during the attack.
Part of the time that they were killing Danielle, they were talking on the phone to Charles Liston, who was egging them on.
Charles Liston's on the phone, they're saying, "Here, tell Charles you love him now." And he wanted to hear her dying. He wanted to hear her last breath.
The medical examiner's report revealed even more shocking evidence of torture.
There were injuries that I'd never seen before, and that was her heels had been slashed, the Achilles tendon. I can only imagine that someone would do that to keep her from running away.
They actually took their knives and severed her ankles, completely cut through her ankle all the way to the bone, where she bled profusely.
They did so many things to Danielle, it almost defies the imagination.
She was going through so much pain, but yet she continued to fight for her life. And I think that made the girls confused about what they were actually trying to accomplish because they couldn't get it done. And at one point, they referred to even calling someone saying, "This bitch won't die. What else can we do to kill her?"
The medical examiner believed that Danielle hung on for over 2 hours before she died.
Danielle Montgomery finally died. They rolled her up in some sheets and then dragged her out to the back porch and tossed her over in the neighbor's yard.
They were so amateurish about it. I mean, these were 3 girls who did a terrible thing and then didn't even know what to do with the body. Hadn't thought, 2 minutes ahead of themselves.
The women tried to clean up the blood that was everywhere in the kitchen. Before they left, Charaty and Crystal told Tiny to call police and pretend she had simply found the body. Detectives Clifford Harper and Byron Harrington got the call to investigate.
While I was processing the scene, I could see in the yard immediately to the east of the victim was what appeared to be a pool of blood coming off the back porch. of the residents there.
Tiny let the detectives into her apartment so they could get a closer look at the blood on the back porch.
While walking through the house, I noticed that the entire residence was a disaster. It was torn apart. Everything was out of place, and as I entered into the kitchen, everything was real clean.
They noticed that there were some knives that were in the sink that appeared to have blood on them.
I could see what appeared to be blood splatter on one of the kitchen walls. And obviously, with my experience, I figured that this is where a crime scene did occur.
Police questioned Tiny, and she immediately told them everything that happened.
Tiny was arrested that night, and the wanteds were placed on Charaty White and Crystal Barge, and they were later picked up about 3 or 4 days later.
The next morning, detectives and the circuit attorney's office learned that their key witness was dead.
Detective Carol and I are sitting there, and we just look at each other and said, how did this happen? What happened? Who got to her?
It's every prosecutor's worst nightmare.
Would you give your full name, please?
Charaty Nadine White.
Charaty White and Crystal Barge readily confessed to the police what they had done.
I admit that I did stick her 3 times. And I stuck her in the chest, so by then, she was still alive. We all cut her. We all played a part in it.
Her own confession explained that she didn't want to lose her boyfriend, Mighty. She didn't want Mighty to go to jail or prison. As she was stabbing Danielle, one of the ways she kept going through it is, this is for Mighty, this is for my man.
What kind of a bag was it that you put over her head?
Some plastic bags.
And what was that for? What'd you put a bag over her head for?
Trying to suffocate.
Were you intoxicated or under the influence of some type of drug that night? What kind? Boy, which is?
Heroin.
Charaty White displayed zero remorse throughout her entire trial.
Baby Doll turned out to be probably one of the ruthless females that I've ever seen. She was just as evil as Charles was.
You know, I never saw Charaty White as, consummate evil or anything. I mean, these are street crimes and some tough characters. They were poor people, and they don't have much education, and they don't have parents giving them good guidance. I mean, they were a group of dead-end kids, really.
23-year-old Charaty was incarcerated at the Women's Eastern Correctional Center in Vandalia, Missouri. In 2006, Crystal Barge was also sentenced to life without parole. Tiny testified against all 3 in exchange for second-degree murder and is now in a prison witness protection program.
And the person that started all of this, Charles Liston, is serving life without the possibility of parole for the murder in the first degree of Danielle Montgomery and murder in the second degree for the murder of Jerome Harden.
For her role in the killing, Charaty White will never be allowed out of prison. The rest of her adult life will be spent coming to terms with the shocking crime she committed as a teenager.
In this case, I barely would glance at a report, and I could remember so many details about it. So it's obviously a case that sticks with you and probably will for my entire life.